Okay, so let's see how we kind of go through day 4 and see how it goes. This first problem, a 9j minus 2 squared, what you want to do right off the bat is you don't want to square both things. Like a is wrong. Because of this minus sign, you actually have to write it like this, where you times it by itself. And that's going to let you know that you need to FOIL this out. So we're going to go through and multiply everything. Well, 9 times 9 is 81, and j times j is j squared. 9 times 2 is negative 18, and then we have a j. Negative 2 times 9 is negative 18, and then we have a j. And negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. And then from here, I can look at my like terms. And my like terms is that negative 36 that's going to be made, which would be answer C. Let's try the next problem. Okay, for this problem, it's again like the first one, where we're just going to kind of FOIL through. I'm going to write this out so it makes it a little bit easier for me to FOIL. But when we FOIL through, we're just going to multiply and see what happens. We should always get 4 terms, and we'll see what those 4 terms are. That's going to be 4x squared plus 22x minus 22x minus 121. And then you should notice that 22x and negative 22x are the same, so those things are going to cancel out. I'm going to be left with 4x squared minus 121, which would be answer B. Let's try the next one. For this problem that I have to factor, when I think about factoring, we think about what multiplies together and what adds together to give me 32. Well, 8 and 4 wouldn't work because 8 times 4 is 32, but 8 plus 4 is not 14. 16 and 2, well, 16 times negative 2 is negative 32, and 16 minus 2 is positive 14, so that one doesn't work because it's a positive 14. Well, negative 16 times 2 is negative 32, and negative 16 plus 2 is my negative 14. So that's why C will be the correct answer. Let's try the next problem. On this problem that we have to factor, it's a little bit harder. We don't want to think what multiplies and what adds, because it's not going to work out. There's nothing that you can make multiply to 8 and add to 11, and it's because of this number that's out in front as a 10. If you remember how we did this before, we took our front number and we times it by our back number here, which would give us negative 80. And then we use that negative 80 to think about what would multiply together to give me negative 80, but add together to give me 11. And that would be 16 and negative 5. And so then we replaced our new middle with those old numbers. And now once we have our new middle, we're going to cut this thing in half. When I cut this thing in half, I'm going to factor out the like terms here, which is 2w. I'm going to factor out the like terms here, which is there are no like. Well, I guess I could take out a negative 1 because they both share a negative. And I'm going to notice what's in here is 5w plus 8. And what I'm going to notice here is 5w plus 8. And then this would be 2w minus 1. This would be 5w plus 8. And that would be my final answer. So it would just be A. Another way you can check this is if you just FOILed them out. So if you get confused in that method, because it's multiple choice, worst case scenario, you could just multiply all of these and double check which one's right. Okay, so it asks what is the vertex of this. If you remember on how to find the vertex, that's negative b over 2a. And so in that case, we would have our negative b, which is this. Since it's already negative, we switch it to a positive. And then 2a would be 2 times 2, or 4. So our x value would be 2. And if you have an x value, you find a y value by plugging that in. when you plug that in, you should get 2 times 2 squared minus 8 times 2. Well, that'd be 4, and 4 times 2 is 8. And then this would be negative 16. So that's how they got their second value to be negative 8. For this problem, since it's multiple choice, I probably wouldn't plug it back in because I know I'd already have the right answer by having the only x that was 2. Let's try the next one. Okay, they have a square root of the fraction. We're just going to square root both things if we can. What's the square root of 36? 6. What's the square root of 49? 7. 6 over 7. So for these, what I would do is if you can square root stuff, square root some stuff. Okay, so here we have a quadratic, and we want to solve a quadratic. I know that because it's equal to 0. And if you remember, we have 4 different methods to solve for quadratics. We have square rooting, we have factoring, we have completing the square, and then we have the quadratic formula. I would not use completing the square because that's the one you struggled with the most, and I don't know which method you're going to use. On this one, we can't use solve by square rooting because it has 2 variables, so it's got to be factoring or quadratic formula. I always like to try to factor because this thing would be very easy to factor because you have to think of 2 numbers that multiply together to give you 4 and add together to give you 3, which that's positive 4 and then negative 1. But since this thing is equal to 0, we have to find what would make these things equal 0, which would be b, because I have to flip the signs on those. Let's try the next one. The next one is the same type of problem as before. To solve quadratics, you have 4 different methods. So I'm going to pick the method that's the easiest for me, which is factoring. So because this is x squared minus 5x minus 14, I know that 8x minus 7 and x plus 2 would work out because negative 7 times 2 is negative 14. Negative 7 plus 2 is negative 5. That thing's equal to 0. So what we have to do is we have to find what would make these things equal 0, which would be 7 and negative 2, which would give me C. Let's try the next one. Okay, so for this problem, what you'd like to do is you'd like to square root this thing. Unfortunately, I don't know what the square root of 108 is, so we're going to have to break that up. And what we're going to break that up into is 36 and 3. You could choose other square roots to make this work, but I always try to find the biggest square root that I know that goes into it, and 36 is the biggest square root that I know go into it. And then after you've chosen 36 and 3, you can break up b to the 4th, and b to the 4th we want to break up into squareds because that makes it a little bit better. The square root of 36 is 6. The square root of 3, we don't know what that is, so we're going to keep that the same. A squared and a square root will cancel. Squared and a square root will cancel. And then b times b will give me b squared. And that would be my final answer, which would be D right there. Let's try the next one. So for this one, what we want to do is we want to see if anything divides, and then we want to see if we can take any square roots, and then if we can't, we have to fix anything that we have to fix. This is won't, like 2 and 6 could divide, but this has a radical and this doesn't, so it won't divide. I don't know what the square root of 5 is. I don't know what the square root of 6 is. And if you're looking at this and you're going, well, what's wrong with this? Because I can't do anything. The big issue is you have a radical on the bottom. So we fix that by multiplying it by the radical on the bottom, which would give you 2x radical 30, and this would give you radical 36. And then we could sit here and go, oh, what's the square root of 36? Well, that is 6. So we'd have 2x radical 30. And that's why A would be my answer for this. Let's try the next one. So in this problem right here, you can't add radicals unless they're the same. So I really can't do anything here. Like I can't add them up. So it's definitely not like A or B. Like they all have to have the same radicals to add. So because we can't add them yet, we're going to try to simplify them as much as we can and then see if they add. 32 could be broken up to 16 and 2. 50 could be broken up to 25 and 2. And 2 is just 2. Well, then we could make this a little simpler. What's the square root of 16? Well, that's 20, or that's 4. And 4 times 5 is 20. This would be the square root of 25 is 5, and that minus 2 is 10. And then we got another plus radical 2. So 20 minus 10 is 10 radical 2. And then we have another radical 2. So I have 10 radical 2's here and 1 radical 2 here. So I have 11 radical 2's, which is why C is my correct answer. Let's try the last problem. Okay, so for this problem right here, the first thing you want to do is try to square root this stuff. I don't know what the square root of 63 is, or the square root of 7, or the square root of y, or the square root of y to the third. So because we don't know any of the square roots, because they're both under the square root, we can actually try to divide them. And 63 divided by 7 would give me 9. And y divided by y to the third is y to the second, but it still has the square root over top of it. And now we could take this square root, and the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of y is squared. That cancels, so it's just y. And that would be my final answer. If you need any help, let me know. And this is the fourth review.